ik ga jou ook vragen om de spreker te introduceren. Dat doe ik eigenlijk omdat het ook iemand is die ook op jouw vakgebied actief is. Een grootheid.
Ja,
Voordat ik meer ga zeggen, zou jij inderdaad de spreker die de komende 20 minuten ons gaat bijnemen willen introduceren?
Ja, ik vind het geweldig. Mensen, ik vind het echt geweldig dat vandaag wij iemand hebben die toen ik psychologie ging studeren, ik zijn boek heb gelezen en daarover tentamen heb moeten doen. Ik heb hem niet verteld het cijfer wat ik heb gehaald, maar ik ben blij dat ik hem nu mee heb kunnen spreken.
Waar is het boek overigens?
Kijk, ik heb een andere versie gelezen, maar ik kan u wel alvast vertellen. Hij heeft een nieuwe geschreven. Daar ga ik straks nog wat over vertellen. Als je wil weten hoe je het ook echt moet toepassen, moet je dit zeker gaan aanschaffen. Maar dit is een man, we hebben het over Robert Cialdini. De meest geciteerde sociaal psycholoog van de wereld. Zijn boek is in 5 miljoen exemplaren in 44 talen vertaald. Hij vertelde me dat het nu in het Thais ook te krijgen valt. Dus voor degenen die Thais onder ons spreken. Je kunt het ook in het Thais lezen. Een andere grootheid zei over hem, dat was Tom Peters van Peters en Waterman, dat hij het beste boek, maar dan ook het best onderbouwde boek heeft geschreven. En dat was zijn eerste boek over influence. Ik ga niet langer eromheen dralen, ik ga hem het woord geven. Ik zeg nog dat Obama in zijn verkiezingscampagne heeft geleund op de theorieën van Robert Cialdini. Dames en heren, ik vraag u applaus voor professor Robert Cialdini.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm honored to be here on the 50th anniversary of SMA. So, thank you for inviting me. And I know many of you have had a chance to read my book, Influence, and there are what I say universal principles of influence there. And some people have said to me, you know, Robert, your book, Influence, and those principles, they are the Bible of internet commerce these days, of electronic marketing, of digital sales and so on. How could you, when this book was written in 1984, how could you look forward and see that these principles would be the guiding lights for digital marketing and e-commerce when there was no digital commerce, there was no e-marketing? How could you look forward and see this? And I say, I didn't look forward. I looked inward. I looked inward at those factors that move people in the direction of a communicator, that have always moved people in the direction of a communicator. Right? And those were the principles that still apply 40 years later on a different platform. But the species, we haven't changed, the platforms have changed, but the motivators that move people in a particular direction have stayed the same. Where did these principles come from? How did I look inward? What was the strategy I used to look inward? It was to become a spy of sorts. That is, to go undercover and apply for employment in all of the existing professions that are dedicated to get others to say yes to their requests or proposals or recommendations. So I would answer ads, inviting people to come into various kinds of influence professions, sales, marketing, advertising, public relations, recruiting, procurement, all of these businesses whose livelihood depended on getting others to move in their direction. And I took their training, and I took great notes, and I had my tape recorder going, and I was taking all of this information in. And here's one thing I learned. In every industry, the trainers would tell us how this industry was different from the other industries that try to get people to say yes. So people in sales would say, sales is not the same as marketing. And the marketers would say, marketing is not the same as advertising. And the advertisers would say, advertising isn't the same as public relations. And in public relations, they say, we're not the same as recruitment. Right? And that was always true. It was always true that these were different from one another. But here's the question that I was answering. What's the same? These are truly different, but what's the same in each of those industries? What moves people toward yes in every one of those different? And what I found was that there was a very limited number of things that everybody said worked in their particular industry. Right? At the time, there were only 6. I counted only 6. And in the process, I decided, there's a book here to be written about these things that are the same, that move people in our direction, where in various kinds of situations and various kinds of industries. So that's where these principles came from. There's something else that I learned in the process. At the end of my visit to each of these training programs, I thought I was ethically required to disclose to the trainers that I wasn't really looking for a job in their particular industry or their particular organization, but that I was a researcher, university researcher, and I studied persuasion, and I needed their approval to allow me to use the data that I had gained from this period of undercover research. And I thought I would use one of my principles, one of the principles that I saw them using, right, to do this. It was the principle of reciprocation. So I said to each one, look, I want your approval to use the information that I've gained. And a lot of them weren't interested right away in doing that because that was proprietary information. They didn't want their tactics that they had spent a lot of time cultivating and honing for success. They didn't want that in the hands of their competitors, for example. So when I asked for this, I knew I had to use one of my principles, and I used the principle of reciprocation, which was to say, look, I'm going to publish a book on the principles that cause people to say yes to requests. I would like to use your data, and it doesn't matter whether you say yes to me or no, I am going to send you, just for the time that you've spent training me and giving me this information, I'm going to send you a copy of my book, a pre-publication copy. Before it's even published, you will get to know what I found out about this process. Right? And I could see right away that was helpful. Right? But there was still some people who were resistant. They didn't like the idea. And there was one other thing that occurred that got those people to say yes. And it wasn't something I designed, but it was essentially this. They would say to me, wait a minute, you mean you're a university professor and your specialty is persuasion and we were your teacher? You were our student? I said, yes. And they would puff up their chest and say, of course. Use the information that we have shown you how to master, right? In other words, I gave them a reputation of teacher. Teacher. It was a reputation that they could then live up to by allowing me to use their materials, because teachers don't hoard the material. They don't keep it to themselves. Teachers do this. So by labeling them as teachers of me, that was a commitment that they were willing to be consistent with. Right? So that's how I got 100% of the people to agree to allow me to use their data. Now, let's ask another question. So here are these principles. And sometimes people ask me, is there anything that you have learned recently and put in your newest book that changed your assumptions about how to use these principles of influence? And I have to admit, there is something that has changed what I believe, right, about the principle of social proof. Right? The one that says, well, let's talk about just briefly the principles. One principle is the principle of reciprocation. People want to say yes to those who have first given to them. They want to give back. The second is the principle of liking. People want to say yes to those they feel a social connection with, that they feel a sense of rapport with. Social proof. People want to say yes to communicators who can give them evidence that a lot of other people, just like them, are saying yes to this particular request or proposal. Right? The authority principle is another. People want to say yes to those communicators who can show them that what they are presenting, what they are offering, fits with what the authorities are recommending. If you can do that, people will be more likely to say yes. Another principle is the principle of commitment and consistency, what we just discussed. People want to be consistent with what they have already said or done, especially in your presence. They want to be consistent with that. And then scarcity. People want more of those things they can have less of. So if there are things that you can offer them that are scarce or rare or unique or dwindling in availability, they will find those more attractive. They will want to move in your direction. And then finally, there's a new principle that is in the new version of the book that I call unity. People will say yes to those individuals who they see as one of them, not just similar to them, but who share an identity with them, a personal identity. Right? Let me give you an example. There was a study done on a university campus in the United States where researchers had a young woman who was about college age, university age, dressed as a university student, and they asked her to go to a certain spot on campus where there was a lot of traffic, and to say, would you give a donation to a charity? It was a good charity, the United Way in the United States. And she was getting some kind of effect. But if they asked her to add one sentence to her request before she asked for a contribution, it skyrocketed the success, right? The sentence was, I'm a student here too, right? So it wasn't similarity, simply being dressed similarly, having the same age. It was being a member of the group that they felt constituted their identity. Right? If you can do that, if you can get people to see you as one of them, all the barriers to influence drop. So those are the principles of influence. What was this one thing that I found that changed my assumptions about how these principles work? It has to do with the principle of social proof, the one that says people want to follow the lead of what many others are doing. What is most popular? What has the greatest sales or market share? They'll want to go in that direction. And people have often said to me, well, what if I have a new product and it doesn't have any popularity yet? Or what if I'm a startup and I have an idea, but there isn't a lot of market share to go with that? What do I do under those circumstances? How do I use social proof then? And my answer was always in the past, well, you don't use social proof then. No, if you don't have it, you don't use it. Use one of the other principles. There are more than one principle. Scarcity would be a good example. If it's brand new and not a lot of people have it, use scarcity. I don't believe that anymore because of some new research on an idea that I hadn't thought of until recently when my team did some research on the idea of future social proof, right? Not the amount of social proof, popularity, or market share that exists at that moment, but the promise of future social proof. And you can do that by describing a trend in the direction of what it is that you have. Even though only a minority of individuals are purchasing or choosing that, if you can show them, for example, that there's a trend in that direction. Let's say you have a new product and you think it's superior to anything else that you're offering, and only 30% of your customers have chosen it. If you say to your customer base, 30% of our customers have chosen this, that's a mistake. Because social proof says people go where the majority is. And your customers can do the math. They know that if it's 30% who are choosing it, that means 70% are deciding not to choose that new product, right? And that actually suppresses purchasing. But if you say, 6 months ago, 10% of our customers chose it. 3 months ago, it was 20%. Now it's 30%. People project that trend into the future and become significantly more likely to choose it, right, as a result. So here's the thing I would like for you to incorporate in your future uses of the idea of social proof. Describe, if you have something new, right, not a lot of people have chosen it. If it is a good idea, even though it's only a minority who have chosen it, you will have a trend in its direction. And I'm going to ask you to unpack your data and provide 3 data points, at least 3 data points. It was this 6 months ago, it was this 3 months ago, and now it's this. That will supercharge the number of people who will move in your direction. So I no longer say to people, no, if you have something new, don't use social proof, but use a different kind of social proof. Future social proof that comes from a trend. Okay, so with that said, let me finish my prepared remarks and ask if there are some questions that people would like to have me address or clarify. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, Robert. We go a little bit to this direction, if you might, because then, I have one question already to you. You have so much experience with those principles. There is a new one, Unity, you said. Is there one principle that stands out above the others? What is more powerful?
So this is really a good question. And it's one that a friend of mine, who is a marketing professor at the University of Florida, decided to answer. He decided to find the single most effective approach to persuasion, the one that in the greatest number of circumstances would cause people to say yes. This should be your favorite. You should use this principle over all the others. Right? So he started this program of investigation, and about 2 years later, I saw him at a conference, academic conference, and he caught me by the arm. He said, "Bob, I found it. I found the single most effective influence approach. It is not to have a single influence approach." That's a fool's game. To think that the same principle would work in all circumstances with all different kinds of audiences that you had different forms of histories with. No. Here's what you do. You use the principle that's there in the situation already. If you've got social proof in on your side, you use it. If you've got scarcity, that's the one you use. If you've got authority voices speaking in your behalf, that's the one you use. The reason I love that kind of approach is that it's not only effective by pointing to something that's truly there, that its engine is running, it's waiting to be engaged, it's also entirely ethical. Because you're not creating anything, you're not manufacturing any of these features, you are simply pointing to them. In other words, we are informing people into assent rather than pushing them or pulling them or coercing them. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for this. I can ask many more questions, but I know we have a time limit. If you want to read more about it, his newest book is already available in Dutch. It's called Influence, de 7 geheimen van het overtuigen. En ik doe het even, dus doe het in Dutch. Wat er hier is toegevoegd ten opzichte van het oude boek, want jullie hebben natuurlijk allemaal invloed in je kast liggen, toch? En gelezen allemaal, ja. Dan moet je dit ook kopen, want hier staat ook in hoe je het moet toepassen. En meer dan ooit is dat belangrijk deze dagen. Dus dit is het nieuwe boek. Dank je. We are going to use future proof for the SMA. We were strong in 84. We are strong in the 90s and we'll be strong in 2030 as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you well, Bob.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.